The monitor alarm began screaming before the little girl did. I crossed the pediatric ward at a run, rubber soles catching against the polished floor while the sharp scent of antiseptic burned the back of my throat. "Claire, her oxygen's dropping," the resident called. I was already at the bedside. I adjusted the mask, lowered my voice, and placed the child's trembling hand against my wrist so she could feel my pulse. "Stay with me, Lily. Match my breathing." Her frightened eyes locked on mine. In. Out. Slowly, the numbers climbed. The alarm softened, then stopped. Her mother sagged against the rail, crying into both hands. I wanted to stay. I wanted to tell her that fear became smaller when someone stood beside it. Instead, the charge nurse appeared in the doorway with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Conference room. Now. That was how my ordinary Thursday shifted, from keeping one child breathing to being told we might lose the equipment that helped dozens more. The pediatric wing had 3 weeks before budget cuts began. The respiratory program would go first. Then weekend staffing. I listened while administrators used words like restructuring and sustainability, as though softer language could make frightened families less real. My goal was simple: finish my shift, prepare a proposal, and convince the board to give us time. I had no room for anything else. Especially the past. I left the meeting carrying a folder thick with numbers and thin with hope. Near the elevators, 2 hospital executives stood straighter as a man approached between them. He wore a charcoal coat darkened at the shoulders by rain. No entourage crowded him. He did not need one. Conversations lowered around him anyway. One executive rushed through an explanation about the funding crisis. The man raised a hand, not impatiently, but with the kind of restraint that made everyone else stop speaking. "No program closes before I see the figures," he said. His voice hit me before his face did. My body remembered it faster than my mind. I stopped walking. Ethan Moretti turned toward me. 7 years disappeared in one breath. He looked older, harder around the mouth, but the authority in him had changed. Once, it had felt like fire, beautiful until you stood too close. Now it felt colder. Measured. He did not cross the hallway. That restraint unsettled me more than anger would have. His eyes moved over my scrubs, the folder in my arms, the badge clipped near my heart. Claire. My name sounded untouched by time. I tightened my grip until the folder bent. "Mr. Moretti," I said, because distance was easier when it had a title. Something shifted behind his eyes, but he accepted the wound without reacting. One of the executives began explaining that Ethan's foundation had supported the wing anonymously for years. I barely heard him. Ethan had been here without being here. His money had crossed into my life while he had not. "Mom." The voice came from behind me. My heart lurched. Noah hurried from the treatment rooms, one sneaker untied, a paper bracelet circling his wrist. He had spent the afternoon being evaluated for recurring migraines, and I had arranged my shift around every test. He reached me and wrapped both arms around my waist. I moved instinctively, placing myself between him and Ethan. Too late. Noah looked past me. Ethan's face changed so slightly no one else would have noticed. His shoulders went still. His gaze fixed on Noah's eyes, then dropped to the hospital bracelet, as if searching for an answer printed there. Noah, curious and unafraid, studied him back. "Do you know my mom?" he asked. Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came. For the first time in all the years I had known him, power failed to give him an answer. I took Noah's hand and turned toward the elevators. "Claire." Ethan's voice followed me, quieter now. Not a command. A question he had not earned the right to ask. The elevator doors opened. I guided Noah inside, then looked back at the man I had once believed I could build a life with. His eyes were still on my son. The distance between us had changed shape. It was no longer 7 years. It was one hallway, one child, and a truth pressing dangerously close to the surface. Not here, I said. Then the doors began to close. The elevator doors met between us, sealing Ethan out with a soft metallic click. Noah's hand stayed inside mine, warm and trusting, while my pulse struck hard against my throat. I pressed the button for the lobby. Who was that? He asked. Someone I used to know. The answer came too quickly. Noah watched my reflection in the mirrored wall, and I knew he heard the strain I had failed to hide. Before he could ask more, the elevator stopped one floor below. The doors opened to a hospital administrator holding the same budget report I had left in the conference room. Behind her stood Ethan. He remained outside the elevator. The board needs your clinical projections before they can delay the cuts, she said. Mr. Moretti requested that the nursing representative be included. I looked at him. He could have used the meeting to corner me. Instead, he had created a reason I could not dismiss without hurting the ward. I'll send the figures tomorrow, I said. The decision is tonight, she replied. Resistance pressed in from every side, the program, Noah's appointment, Ethan's silent attention. I crouched and retied Noah's loose sneaker, buying myself 3 seconds. Then I made the choice. 20 minutes, I said. No personal questions. Ethan stepped back to clear the doorway. Agreed. I arranged for Noah to wait in the family room within sight of the conference glass, then entered with my folder still bent beneath my fingers. Ethan sat across from me, not at the head of the table. That unsettled the administrators more than it reassured me. They presented numbers. I presented consequences, delayed treatments, longer admissions, children sent across the city for care their families could not reach. When one executive interrupted, Ethan lifted his gaze. Let her finish. No threat sharpened the words. None was needed. I completed the proposal and recommended a 90-day extension tied to measurable outcomes. Ethan studied the figures, then turned to the board. Approve it. The administrator hesitated. The foundation would require additional exposure. No publicity, he said. And no conditions involving Ms. Bennett. My eyes rose to his. Years ago, Ethan had treated help like a door only he could unlock. Now he had removed himself from the doorway. The extension passed. When the room emptied, I stayed standing. You don't get to buy a conversation. I know. No gifts. No people following us. No calls to Noah's school, doctors, or anyone in our life. His jaw tightened once, then released. You have my word. Your word used to mean you would come back. The sentence escaped before I could stop it. Pain crossed his face without defense. I'm not asking you to trust it yet. Through the glass, Noah lifted a paper airplane and waved. Ethan looked toward him, then deliberately looked away first. That single act of restraint weakened something I had spent 7 years reinforcing. I hated him for making restraint feel more dangerous than pressure. I collected my folder. You leave us alone unless I contact you. He stood but did not move closer. Then tell me one thing, Claire. Is he safe? Not who he was. Not whether Ethan had guessed correctly. Safe. I should have walked out. Instead, I answered. He is because I made sure of it. Ethan absorbed the rebuke. Then I won't interfere. I reached the door before he spoke again. But the hospital requires a foundation liaison for the 90-day review. I turned. The administrator's signature was already on the final page. Beneath it, beside the word liaison, was Ethan Moretti's name. Continued contact was no longer a request. It was an obligation I had helped create. I stared at Ethan's name on the liaison agreement until the ink blurred. It felt absurd that one signature could rearrange the next 3 months of my life. The administrator thanked us both, gathered the paperwork, and hurried away as if she feared the silence left behind. I folded the proposal into my worn folder and headed for the family room before Noah decided paper airplanes were meant for hospital hallways instead of chairs. Ethan didn't follow. I noticed because part of me expected him to. Noah looked up the moment I opened the door. "Did we save the kids?" he asked. I smiled despite everything. "We bought them some time." He accepted that answer with the uncomplicated optimism only children possessed. As we walked toward the parking garage, rain tapped softly against the glass walls of the corridor. I was almost to the elevator when a security supervisor called my name. "Ms. Bennett, you left this." He handed me a folder identical to mine. I thanked him, slipped it under my arm, and didn't realize the mistake until I reached my car. Inside were financial reports from Ethan's foundation, meeting notes, and handwritten comments in neat black ink. There were no photographs. No lists of enemies. No evidence of the dangerous empire I had spent years convincing myself still ruled his life. Every page was about pediatric programs, staffing shortages, and clinics in neighborhoods where families skipped medical care because they could not afford gas. I should have closed it immediately. Instead, I noticed one line circled twice. "Keep Bennett's proposal independent. No special treatment. Merit must stand on its own." My chest tightened. Before I could think better of it, I drove back to the hospital. Returning the folder was the responsible thing to do. That was the excuse I repeated until I believed it. Ethan was still in the conference suite, but the room had changed. The executives were gone. Two men in dark suits waited near the hallway, speaking quietly into earpieces. They straightened the moment Ethan stepped outside, yet neither interrupted him. Influence, I realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like people trusting someone's decisions before hearing them. Ethan accepted the folder from me without opening it. "Thank you. You should be more careful." "Usually I am." I almost left. Then one of the suited men approached with a tablet. "The Mercer property is ready. We can proceed tonight." Ethan glanced at the screen. His expression never shifted, but the hallway somehow felt colder. "Reschedule it," he said. The man hesitated. "Everyone is already waiting." "Then they can keep waiting." It was such a small exchange that no one else would have remembered it. I did because Ethan looked directly at me before speaking. For one impossible second, I knew the decision had changed because I was standing there. I hated that knowledge. "You shouldn't rearrange your life because I walked into a hospital," I said. "I'm rearranging it because I almost missed something worth seeing." The words carried no flirtation, no pressure. Only quiet regret. I had no safe response to that. Noah tugged my sleeve from several feet away, impatient to go home. I nodded once and turned toward him. Behind me, Ethan's phone vibrated. He answered with a single word. "Yes." He listened without speaking. By the time I reached Noah, the warmth had vanished from his face. "Postpone everything," he said into the phone. "No exceptions." He ended the call and looked toward the pediatric wing instead of the exit. Something larger than funding had shifted beneath the surface, and whatever he had just delayed was important enough that other powerful people would not accept waiting forever. The drive home should have settled my thoughts. Instead, every traffic light seemed to stop beside another children's clinic wearing a sign that begged for donations, another family carrying a child too tired to walk, another reminder that the hospital survived because someone kept saying yes when everyone else said no. I slept badly, arrived before sunrise, and buried myself in work. Routine had always been my safest place. Medications. Vitals. Charting. Parents who needed steady voices more than perfect answers. By noon I almost believed the previous evening had been an interruption instead of the beginning of something. Then the respiratory therapist hurried toward me. "Claire, conference room 3. They already installed the replacement equipment." I frowned. "Installed? We haven't even finalized purchasing." Apparently it was delivered before dawn. I followed her downstairs. Brand new pediatric monitors sat neatly unpacked beside sealed ventilator units our department had spent months requesting. No balloons. No ribbon cutting. No cameras. Just technicians quietly checking serial numbers before returning to work. Who approved this? I asked. The biomedical supervisor shrugged. Anonymous emergency authorization. All paperwork cleared overnight. Anonymous. My stomach tightened around the word. It matched the note I had accidentally read inside Ethan's folder. Keep Bennett's proposal independent. Merit must stand on its own. Whatever this was, it hadn't bypassed my proposal. It had simply ensured the children wouldn't wait for bureaucracy. The distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. Later that afternoon I found Ethan standing alone outside the pediatric therapy garden, reading the dedication plaque instead of looking through the windows. He noticed me immediately but stayed where he was. You already knew, I said. About the equipment. Yes. You arranged it. Not exactly. That answer irritated me enough to step closer. Either you did or you didn't. He rested one hand against the stone railing. The foundation approved emergency inventory months ago. I accelerated delivery after yesterday's meeting. Without telling anyone. Because children don't care who signs the paperwork. I searched his face for satisfaction, for the quiet pride powerful men sometimes carried after solving other people's problems. I found none. Only exhaustion. The lines around his eyes looked deeper in daylight, as if sleep had become something negotiated instead of received. You could have taken credit, I said before thinking. Would that have helped the ward? I didn't answer because it wouldn't have. We stood in silence for only a heartbeat, watching a little boy inside the therapy room celebrate 3 independent steps while his father cried harder than the child did. Ethan smiled so faintly I almost missed it. He'll remember those 3 steps longer than anyone remembers a donor's name, he said. Something shifted inside me, not trust, not forgiveness, but the uncomfortable realization that the man beside me was no longer behaving like the version I had spent 7 years protecting myself against. Then my pager vibrated. Noah's neurologist wanted to repeat one of yesterday's scans. Nothing urgent, the message promised. Just another precaution. Fear ignored the word precaution. I excused myself immediately, but Ethan didn't ask why. He simply moved aside so I could pass. Halfway down the hallway I stopped and turned back. Thank you, I heard myself say. For the equipment. Not for me. For them. He nodded once, accepting the boundary exactly as I offered it. I reached radiology minutes later, where Noah sat swinging his legs from the examination table, drawing rockets on the back of an appointment form. The technician handed me his intake paperwork to review before the scan. Tucked inside was a financial assistance approval already stamped and processed. I had never submitted the application. Through the observation window, Noah folded the appointment form into another paper airplane while the technician adjusted the new monitor beside him. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the sight of Ethan's influence surrounding my son made every breath feel borrowed. The equipment had kept Noah from being transferred across town. That was good. Necessary. But gratitude had opened a door I had spent 7 years locking, and I no longer knew how to close it without pretending the children mattered less than my fear. The technician stepped out. He's anxious about the scan. We can try again, but he has to stay completely still. I entered the room and crouched beside Noah. You've done this before. I know. He rubbed the edge of the paper between his fingers. It sounds different today. The new machine made a deeper mechanical hum. Harmless, but unfamiliar. I offered to stay where he could see me. He shook his head. You have patience. He was 7 and already measuring his needs against mine. That realization hurt more than it should have. Before I could answer, he looked past me toward the corridor. Ethan stood beyond the open doorway, speaking quietly with the foundation administrator. He hadn't followed me. He hadn't asked about Noah. He was simply fulfilling the liaison obligation I had helped create. Noah lifted the crooked airplane. Could he stay? Every instinct in me said no. Every promise I had made myself demanded distance. But Noah's fingers were trembling, and Ethan had already proven he could respect a boundary without punishing me for it. I stood. 5 minutes, I told Ethan. You stay outside the scan room. You don't ask him personal questions. He looked at Noah, then back at me. Understood. Inside, Noah handed him the paper airplane through the doorway. Hold this until I'm done. Ethan accepted it with both hands, as carefully as if the paper could break. I'll be here. The scan began. I watched from the control area while Ethan remained visible through the glass, his charcoal coat folded over one arm, the little airplane resting in his palm. His phone vibrated twice. He silenced it. On the third call, one of the suited men appeared at the far end of the corridor. Ethan listened while the man spoke close to his ear. Whatever he heard tightened every line in his body. He glanced at Noah inside the machine. Handle it without me, he said. The man lowered his voice. You said no one else could make that decision. Ethan's thumb pressed lightly against the paper wing. Then they wait. The man left. Ethan stayed. Noah completed the scan without moving once. When the machine stopped, he climbed down and went directly to Ethan. You kept it. I said I would. Ethan returned the airplane instead of turning the promise into anything larger. Noah smiled at him with an openness that made fear rise under my ribs. This was no longer a stranger's curiosity. It was recognition without knowledge, trust without permission. On the walk back toward pediatrics, Noah talked to Ethan about rockets, hospital food, and why blue markers always dried out first. Ethan listened as though none of it were small. I could have ended the conversation. I almost did. Then Noah stumbled over his untied lace, and Ethan stopped without touching him, waiting until Noah fixed it himself. The restraint was so exact that I knew he remembered every boundary I had named. At the nurse's station, I finally said, "That's enough for today." Ethan nodded immediately. Noah's smile faded. Will you come back? The question landed between us. Ethan did not answer until he looked at me. He gave me the choice. That was what changed everything. I could protect the life I had built by closing the door again. Or I could admit Noah had already stepped through it. For the foundation review, I said carefully. Tomorrow afternoon. Ethan understood the limit. Tomorrow. He left without asking for more. Noah watched him disappear around the corner, then slipped his hand into mine. Mom? What? He looked up at me with those eyes I had avoided explaining for 7 years. Why does he feel like someone I already know? Noah's question followed me into the empty consultation room like a second heartbeat. Why does he feel like someone I already know? I closed the door, set my bent folder on the table, and waited for Ethan to arrive for the foundation review the next afternoon. I had chosen the room because its walls were solid, its blinds could be lowered, and Noah was safely occupied in the pediatric activity center 2 floors away. For 7 years, I had told myself silence was protection. After watching my son trust Ethan, that explanation no longer felt complete. Ethan entered alone and stopped when he saw the blinds closed. Is Noah all right? He's fine. I pointed to the chair across from me. Sit. He did without questioning the command. The same man who could make hospital executives wait now folded his hands on a laminate table and let me control the room. That should have made speaking easier. It didn't. You asked if he was safe, I said. You didn't ask if he was yours. His gaze held mine. You told me not to. The answer struck exactly where it should have. Every boundary I had set, he had obeyed. Even when obedience hurt him. I reached into my folder and placed Noah's original birth certificate between us, face down. Ethan's breathing changed, barely. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you disappeared. The silence that followed had weight. He looked at the paper but did not touch it. Did you try to contact me? No, the word cut through both of us. His jaw tightened, then steadied. Why? Because the night before you left, 2 men followed me from work. One waited outside my apartment until morning. You told me it was handled. Then you vanished without a goodbye. His eyes closed for a second. That was all. But I saw the truth in the reaction before he spoke. They were watching you because of me. The confession changed an old memory instantly. I had believed his silence meant I had stopped mattering. Instead, I had mattered enough to become leverage. You knew? My voice went cold. I knew there was a threat. I believed leaving would remove it. So you decided for me. Yes. No defense. No softening. It was the worst decision of my life. Anger rose so fast my hands shook. You didn't protect me, Ethan. You taught me that loving you meant waking up alone and never knowing why. His face tightened as if I had struck him. I thought you would hate me and survive. I did both. He looked down at the birth certificate. And Noah? I built a life where no one could use him against you, or use you against him. For the first time, something close to anger entered his voice. You let me lose 7 years. You left before I could tell you there was anything to lose. The words landed, and neither of us could take them back. His phone vibrated against the table. He ignored it once. Then again. On the third vibration, the screen lit long enough for me to see the message preview. Mercer refuses the delay. Decision required. The same matter he had postponed when I returned his folder. The same decision his men said no one else could make. I stared at the screen, then at him. What exactly have you been delaying for us? Ethan turned the phone face down. Something I should have ended years ago. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I can give without putting you inside it. The old pattern returned so cleanly it stole my breath. Danger, secrecy, a decision made on my behalf. Every quiet donation, every respected boundary, every promise suddenly stood beside the part of his life he still refused to name. I turned the birth certificate over, then pulled it back before he could read the father's line. Claire. No, I stood. You don't get the truth while you're still protecting me with secrets. His face went still. What are you saying? I opened the door. Tomorrow's review is cancelled. You stay away from Noah until I know which man keeps coming back, the one who waited outside the scan room, or the one who disappeared because he thought my life belonged to his decisions. This time, when I walked away, Ethan did not follow. But I heard his phone ring again behind me, and then his answer, quiet, final, and more frightening than anger. Tell Mercer I'm done postponing it. For the first time in 7 years, Ethan kept every promise by disappearing. 3 days passed without a message, a phone call, or a chance encounter in the hallway. The Foundation review was reassigned to another representative. The pediatric staff only mentioned that Mr. Moretti had cancelled every hospital appearance indefinitely. I should have been relieved. Instead, the silence felt heavier than his presence ever had. It settled into every ordinary moment, charting medications, checking temperatures, tying tiny hospital gowns that never seemed to fit frightened children. I had asked him to stay away. He had listened. That was the problem. Noah noticed before anyone else. On Friday afternoon he carried the paper airplane Ethan had returned after the scan, smoothing its bent wing against his knee while I finished documenting discharge instructions. He didn't come back, he said quietly. I kept my eyes on the chart. No. Did he break his promise? The question caught me off guard because he wasn't accusing Ethan. He sounded disappointed. No, I answered honestly. He kept the promise I asked him to keep. Noah frowned as though adults had invented rules that only adults understood. Sometimes promises fight each other. I had no answer for that. Later, after Noah fell asleep in the family lounge while waiting for one final consultation, I walked through the therapy garden alone. The evening air carried the scent of wet grass after a brief summer shower. The stone bench where I had thanked Ethan sat empty. I realized I had unconsciously expected to find him there. Instead, A maintenance worker was replacing the small bronze dedication plate beside the garden entrance. Curious, I stepped closer. The old plaque listed dozens of contributors. The new one listed none. At the bottom, a single line had been engraved, dedicated to every child who deserves tomorrow. Anonymous by request. My chest tightened. Even after I pushed him away, he had removed the only public recognition attached to the project. Not because anyone demanded it. Because he had. I was still staring at the words when the hospital administrator approached carrying a thick envelope. "Claire, I was looking for you." She handed it over. "This was left with legal before Mr. Moretti withdrew from the foundation board yesterday." "Withdrew?" She nodded. "Effective immediately. Complete resignation." My fingers went cold around the envelope. Inside was a signed transition document transferring oversight of every pediatric initiative to an independent medical trust. No family name. No voting authority retained. No special privileges. Just one handwritten note clipped to the front. "You were right. Children should never depend on my world." I read it twice. Then a third time. The realization settled slowly, painfully. The phone call from Mercer. The postponed decisions. The cancelled meetings. He hadn't been protecting his empire. He had been dismantling his place inside it. I sank onto the bench before my knees could give way. If that was true, then the story I had built to keep Noah safe was no longer complete. But neither was it finished. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket just as my pager sounded. Noah's neurologist wanted to see me immediately. I hurried upstairs expecting scan results. Instead, the doctor placed a sealed envelope on the desk. "These records were delivered this afternoon," he said. "Someone requested they be added to Noah's file only if you agreed to open them." My name was written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. Ethan had obeyed every boundary I gave him. Even now, the choice belonged entirely to me. I rested my hand on the unopened envelope, knowing that once I broke the seal, neither Noah nor I could ever return to the life we had before. My thumb rested against the seal for almost a full minute before I broke it. The paper inside was thick, folded once, with no legal language and no attempt to persuade me. Ethan's handwriting remained as controlled as I remembered. "Claire. If you're reading this, it means you chose to. Thank you. I never asked whether Noah was mine because you asked me not to. If the answer is yes, I will accept whatever place you allow me to have in his life. If the answer is no, nothing changes. The children's wing will never lose my support. Neither choice requires forgiveness." I stopped reading because my eyes had blurred. There was no demand for proof. No request for a test. No argument that biology entitled him to anything. Beneath the letter sat one final document, his signed resignation from every position connected to the organization that had built his power. Attached was a statement transferring permanent control of the foundation to an independent medical trust. Irrevocable. My breath caught. The anonymous donations. The postponed meetings. Mercer's angry messages. The phone calls Ethan kept refusing. They had never been about choosing business over us again. They had been about dismantling the last structure that could reach us through him. I carried the papers to Noah's neurologist. "These are genuine?" I asked quietly. He adjusted his glasses before nodding. "They were verified this morning. Mr. Moretti asked that nothing be added to Noah's medical file without your written consent. Even now, he had left the final decision to me. For years I had believed Ethan's greatest failure was leaving. Now I understood the deeper one. He had believed sacrificing himself without explanation was love. I had believed surviving without truth was strength. We had both built our lives on choices made out of fear. Neither had protected Noah from growing up with unanswered questions. I walked down to the pediatric garden carrying the unopened birth certificate I had pulled away from Ethan days earlier. The evening light settled softly across the stone path where children chased soap bubbles drifting above the grass. Ethan was there, not waiting near the entrance but trimming dead blossoms from a flower bed with a pair of borrowed gardening shears while the maintenance crew packed away their tools. No suit jacket. Shirt sleeves rolled once. No one hovered around him. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, then immediately lowered the shears and stayed where he was. I crossed the distance between us because this time it had to be my choice. I placed the birth certificate in his hands. Read it. His eyes moved slowly across the page until they reached the line I had hidden from him. He closed them for a brief second, then looked back at me with tears he made no effort to hide. He's my son. It wasn't triumph. It sounded like grief for 7 years that could never be returned. I nodded once. Yes. He held the paper carefully, as though afraid even now that he had no right to it. Claire. I don't know how to deserve this. You don't, I answered. Not yet. Before he could speak again, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen but didn't answer. I saw only one word before he silenced it forever: Mercer. Ethan removed the SIM card, snapped it cleanly in half, and dropped both pieces into the nearby trash. Then he looked back at me. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, there's no going back. For the first time, I believed him. The question was no longer whether Noah belonged to Ethan. It was whether the future Ethan had chosen would cost us everything before we ever had the chance to become a family. The pieces of Ethan's broken SIM card were still lying in the trash when Noah found us in the therapy garden. He slowed to a stop, his eyes moving from me to Ethan, then to the birth certificate folded carefully between Ethan's hands. No one rushed to explain. No one reached for him. For the first time since Ethan had re-entered our lives, neither of us tried to control what happened next. Noah looked at me first. Mom? I knelt until we were eye level. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. My voice trembled, but I didn't hide behind it. The man standing there. I glanced back at Ethan. He hadn't moved an inch closer. Is your father? Noah didn't answer immediately. He studied Ethan with the same quiet concentration he used when solving difficult puzzles. Did you know? He asked Ethan. Ethan shook his head. No. Your mom found out after I was gone. Then why didn't you come back? I felt Ethan's silence before I heard it. Because I believed leaving would keep both of you safe, he said. I was wrong. There were no excuses. No speeches. Just the truth, finally spoken without asking someone else to carry it. Noah lowered his eyes to the paper airplane tucked into Ethan's shirt pocket. You kept this. Ethan carefully removed it and smiled faintly. One wing was still bent where Noah had folded it days before. I promised I would. Noah reached out, took the airplane, smoothed the crease with one small thumb, then looked at me again. The decision wasn't his alone. It never should have been. I stood and walked the last few steps toward Ethan. You resigned from everything that gave you power, I said quietly. Not to earn us. He nodded once. To make sure you never had to fear it again. I searched his face for the man who had once believed love meant disappearing without explanation. He wasn't gone. He would always be part of Ethan's story. But he was no longer making Ethan's choices. That difference mattered. I can't give you back 7 years. I know. I can't promise this will be easy. I don't want easy. I took a slow breath. Then start with the truth. Every day. No more decisions made for us. Every day, he repeated. It wasn't a vow wrapped in grand words. It sounded like work. Honest work. I turned to Noah. What do you think? He looked between us for one long moment before walking straight to Ethan. Instead of throwing himself into a hug, he held out the paper airplane. You should keep it, he said. So you remember to come back. Ethan accepted it exactly the way he had the first time, with both hands, as though it were the most valuable thing he had ever been trusted to hold. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. Noah slipped one hand into mine and, after a brief hesitation, reached his other hand toward Ethan. Ethan waited until I nodded before taking it. We left the garden together, not because the past had disappeared, but because none of us allowed it to choose the future anymore. Years earlier, Ethan had ruled his world by deciding for everyone around him. The man walking beside us had learned something stronger. Love doesn't grow from the power to hold on. It grows from becoming someone another person freely chooses to walk beside.